Hi, everybody. Sorry to be a bit late. Okay, I was over at Dee's show uh, around the world with Dee and friends, and I was a little delayed because in the final moments of that show, there was news of a video that uh, was actually released from the International Court, of Justice, uh, where the news, was broken that they have found against the Israelis and for South Africa. If this news is confirmed, which I hope it shortly will be, this will mean that uh, this is probably the most rapid action of the International Court of Justice in such a case. The hearings in this case took place on January 11th and January 12th, and it's now 5 days later, and they've come to a decision, which means that the case was so obvious that they weren't able to do anything else except to find in favor of the South African complaint. And they came up with a number of specific orders for the Israelis to comply with. Uh, the Israelis have about a week to comply, and basically, this amounts to ordering the Israelis to cease fire and all military action, in Gaza. So if this is confirmed, this is huge news, huge and wonderful news, for us all. And Kay is here. Hi, Kay. How are you tonight? I hope you've heard that there was this wonderful news from the the International Court of Justice, the World Court. We are waiting for confirmation. Just last night, on this show, of course, we talked about, the possibilities and the probabilities that the court was going to find in favor of South Africa. Even though we have to confirm it, it's evidently the case that they have found in favor, of South Africa, and they did it in an unprecedented amount of time. I was speculating based on what others were saying last night that this might happen, that there might be a decision in 2 weeks' time, but it looks like it only took them 5 days to come to a decision. So this is just fantastic. I don't think anybody was expecting such very rapid action on the part of the International Criminal Court. It's a very good thing that they acted so rapidly because we've been looking at 165 deaths on the part of the Palestinians each day this goes on. So it was imperative that they acted fast, and they evidently have acted fast. Hi, Steve. And Andy Candy says, "Hi, Joe. Wonderful news lurking in the background. Rapid justice indeed." Yeah, it does seem like it's, really wonderful news. Well, of course, the topic of this show is different. So we do have to get to that. But if you are in touch with what's going on, in the larger world, and feel free to add some comments on what's happening, in the wider world at this point while I go through this dump the corruption show. Okay, so tonight's topic is that the rich get richer, democracy continues to fail, at least our democracy. And there's some interesting polling on a possible banning of Trump by the Supreme Court from presidential ballots. There was some polling that's been done on this, and that was surprisingly favorable to the idea, but we'll get to that as we go along. I want to start with the news that the rich are getting richer. So I'll pull up the first article, okay, about that. And this piece is from Common Dreams. And you see a sign saying tax the rich. A demonstrator holds a sign that reads, quote, tax the rich, quote unquote, during a protest in Davos, Switzerland, ahead of the World Economic Forum on January 14th, 2024, 3 days ago. And the headline is World's First Trillionaire Just 10 Years Away as Richest Men Double Their Wealth. Quote, this inequality is no accident. The billionaire class is ensuring corporations deliver more wealth to them at the expense of everyone else, unquote, said Oxfam's interim executive director. This one's by Jake Johnson, January 15th, 2024. And Jake says, since 2020, a year marked by the spread of a pathogen that killed millions of people, the world's 5 richest men have seen their collective wealth more than double. As 5 billion people across the globe have lost ground and hunger has surged, underscoring the deep inequality that is fueling mass content and eroding democracies. The finding by Oxfam International was published on Monday as elites gathered in Davos, Switzerland for the annual World Economic Forum, a summit that, while ostensibly aimed at confronting the planet's most pressing crises, has long been seen as a symbol of global capital's stranglehold on key institutions. Oxfam calculated that combined wealth of the 5 richest billionaires on the planet grew from $405 billion in 2020 to roughly $869 billion today, a rate of $14 million an hour. During that same period, 60% of the global population got poorer, with the real wages of around 800 million workers across 52 countries falling in the face of high inflation. Under the status quo, global poverty won't be eradicated for nearly 2.5 centuries, but the world will have its first trillionaire within the next 10 years, Oxfam found. Quote, we're witnessing the beginnings of a decade of division, with billions of people shouldering the economic shockwaves of pandemic, inflation, and war, while billionaires' fortunes boom, unquote. That's a quote from Amitabh Behar, Oxfam's interim executive director, who said in a statement, quote, this inequality is no accident. The billionaire class is ensuring corporations deliver more wealth to them at the expense of everyone else, unquote. How do they ensure that? They ensure that, of course, okay, and I'm not reading from the article now, by buying the politicians in every country in which they operate and seeing to it that no laws are passed that result in any shrinkage of their fortunes. will that create any greater equality in the various countries of the world? The rich are behind the inequality. As this quote says, it is no accident. And Oxfam America tweeted, the wealth of the world's 5 richest men more than doubled since 2020, while 5 billion people globally have become poorer. More on our annual inequality report here, and that's a reference to CNN, the CNN article on this. And who are the 5 richest people? There's Jeff Bezos, of course, and Warren Buffett, and maybe not so, of course, in that case, because Bill Gates, who for a long time had more wealth uh, than Buffett, and who was sort of partnering with Buffett, in various ways. Bill Gates is no longer in the top 5. The number 3 man is Bernard, Arnault, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And he is in the area, I believe, of cosmetics. And his fortune comes, from Estee Lauder. And that fortune, and of course many other investment interests, that fortune has increased over time. His being in this group may be a bit of a surprise to you. And the 4th person in this group, is Larry Ellison, of Oracle, who's of course had a great fortune for some time, but perhaps the increase, in that fortune is something of a surprise. And the 5th person in this group is Elon Musk. And that is a surprise, to no one. Overall, the world's billionaires have gotten $3.3 trillion richer since the start of the decade, Oxfam said, noting that their wealth grew 3 times faster than inflation. Larger corporations, too, have seen their fortunes surge since 2020, with around 150 of the biggest companies bringing in a combined $1.8 trillion in profits, a massive boon for wealthy shareholders. It came as workers suffered from the economic turmoil induced by the coronavirus pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, worsening climate impacts, and other global shocks. And of course, to see this result is no surprise for those of us who were following the pandemic and following the bailouts of the pandemic, from the pandemic here in the United States. Those bailouts were designed to primarily benefit the very wealthy, and to result in the lack of survival of many, many small businesses, while the large corporations were able to consolidate their wealth, and also their positions. In particular, the CARES Act, in the United States was oriented, towards doing that. It was particularly designed to safeguard the stock market and safeguard the very wealthy corporations. 70% of the largest companies have a billionaire as their chief executive or top shareholder. Oxfam's report spotlights the, quote, sustained and highly effective war on taxation, unquote, that powerful corporations have been waging over the past several decades, a war that has yielded a significantly lower corporate income tax rate that has allowed companies to amass vast riches and entrench their political influence. And of course, we know and we can't forget that that significantly lower corporate tax rate was produced by legislators who were bought by the corporations and bought also by the wealthy and bought by the PACs, bought by super PAC support and by party committee support. Quote, corporate taxes are disproportionately borne by the richest. Thus, the collapse in corporate taxes in recent decades has essentially provided another tax cut for the wealthy, unquote. The report states, quote, it has also deprived governments around the world, but especially in the global south, of trillions of US dollars in revenue that could be used to reduce inequality and end poverty. Every tax dollar dodged is a nurse that will never be hired or a school that cannot be built, unquote. To rein in excessive corporate power and accelerating inequality, Oxfam recommended several broad policy solutions, including the breakup of companies that are monopolistic, such as Amazon, and a global wealth tax on the world's millionaires and billionaires, which the group estimated could generate $1.8 trillion a year in revenue that could be invested in education, healthcare, environmental protection, and other critical priorities. Quote, runaway corporate and monopoly power is an inequality generating machine through squeezing workers, dodging tax, privatizing the state, and spurring climate breakdown. Corporations are funneling endless wealth to their ultra-rich owners, unquote, said Behar, and quote again, but they're also funneling power, undermining our democracies and our rights. No corporation or individual should have this much power over our economies and our lives. To be clear, nobody should have, $1 billion. Of course, I certainly agree with that and have said that myself on numerous occasions on this stream. But the important thing here to emphasize is that even though Oxfam is recommending broad policy solutions, we will never get those broad policy solutions without first engaging in a successful dump the corruption campaign that replaces every legislator who is taking big money from the corporations and the rich and the PACs, getting the support of the super PACs, and getting money from party committees that in turn has been coming from the corporations and the rich, and the PACs. So we've all seen, again and again, this process actually happening. What we have to understand is that there's a feedback loop here, and it's a positive feedback loop. It's positive for wealth. It needs to be negative for wealth. But what happens is every success they have in dodging taxes and reducing taxes, increases their power, their capability to buy the office holders. Over time, this creates a feedback loop where more and more of the legislators are bought uh, by the corporations, and more okay, of the legislators will oppose any kind okay, of legislation that is working against this particular feedback loop. Just to take a single example, and let me let in Dee, since she seems to have arrived right now. Hello, Dee.
Hello, how are you doing, Joe?
Doing fine, Dee. Thank you. I'm just sort of at the end of the first of our articles, which is the article on the news report okay, from Oxfam,
Okay.
reporting that the wealth of the very wealthy has more than doubled since 2020. It was $405 billion, and I'm sorry, oh yeah, $1 billion, and has now increased to $869 billion uh, in just the 4 years since the beginning of 2020, since the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, has been due to the pandemic and this disruption of the supply chains, and of course to the wars, okay, and all these things. But this has resulted in a further concentration, okay, of wealth, and also the ability of the rich to buy the office holders, so they can stop okay, the occurrence of any kind of negative feedback loop that might reduce their wealth over a period of time, and reduce the inequality which is present okay, in the world. And so when you came in, I was making that okay, particular point. There was some very striking statistics okay, in this article. The report okay, from Oxfam actually deserves much closer analysis. Perhaps I can do that okay, on Friday. Of course, there was no time for this show because uh, it's a lengthy report, not just one report, actually. There's an executive summary, there's a longer report, and there's a report on okay, the methodology they followed in getting to their findings. But their findings are very striking, and okay, they are presented okay at Davos. Okay, at this point, I think study was actually funded by uh, the WEF, okay, the World Economic Forum. Uh, okay, the findings were interesting, even in terms of who the 5 people were who were the richest. We expected that Jeff Bezos was going to be one of those, and that Musk okay, was going to be one of those. Maybe some people would have thought, okay, that Warren Buffett would still be, among the richest. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Okay, but the presence, okay, of Arnault, the French um, um, cosmetics king, the roots of whose wealth, okay, are in Estee Lauder. I didn't expect him to be quite so rich as to be in the top 5. Didn't expect also that Larry Ellison was going to be in the top 5, but he is. So that was a surprise. Who is Larry Ellison? He is the head, okay, of Oracle, and his fortune had increased over these years. I believe before this, he was at something like 50 or 60 million, but now he is sitting at something like 100. I shouldn't say million, I should say billion. He is sitting at something like $130 billion. So huge, huge wealth. I was surprised Bill Gates was not in this group. I was surprised that the Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim Peter was not in this group. I was a bit surprised the Adelson fortune was not in some way represented, okay, in this group. But anyway, those were the five, okay, the richest. So we'll leave it, okay, at that. And we'll note the main point that's being made, okay, by Oxfam here is they're getting so rich because the tax rates are so low, and the tax rates are so low because the legislators are bought. Okay. So that's the first of the pieces we'll cover tonight. And the second one is on piece by Tom Hartman. Okay, it's a longer piece, as many of you know. Okay, he's a favorite around here of mine, and I think of Kay Rhine's, okay, as well. Okay, I don't like the fact that he's a vote blue no matter who guy, but other than that, I really respect his analysis. There's a picture of Mr. MAGA himself, Donald Trump, with his son, Donald Trump Jr., playing golf at the Trump National Doral Miami Golf Club on October 7th, 2022. And the photo is from Giorgio Vieira / AFP via Getty Images. Will the U.S. choose democracy or extreme wealth concentration? After that report, okay, from Oxfam, it seems that we've already chosen extreme wealth concentration. But let's go on with the article. This year's election will not only decide whether we're going to let Trump or a similar Republican end American democracy. Well, I think it's already been ended, but we have been trying to get it back. Some of us, okay, many of us. So maybe we talk about ending all hopes of getting it back anytime soon. It will also, if enough of us show up, he's talking about, show up for the voting, determine if we can purge our political system, okay, of big money. So he seems to be thinking that if enough of us show up for this election, we can somehow get the big money in politics under control. But I'm really puzzled by this because I know Tom is going to recommend that we get big money under control by doing vote blue no matter who. And perhaps I'm being unfair to him, but that's the way he seems to behave. And I don't think that's going to get rid of the influence of big money in politics. I think we have to vote out everyone taking the big money, including the blue candidates who are taking the big money. And we have shown in previous live streams here that at least every blue office holder that we surveyed and every red office holder that we surveyed was taking big money. And we surveyed already 205 of the office holders in either the House, okay, or the Senate. So Donald Trump won Iowa, a crazed billionaire who wants to, quote, suspend the Constitution, unquote, and claims the right to murder his political enemies. Doesn't have to be this way. Yes, he does claim that right. Okay, imagine. He's been claiming it in various ways since before he was president. Also, I have to mention here the news that's been surfacing, this week about his behavior and the variety of lawsuits that he's involved in. Yeah, he looks like a crazed billionaire there also. He's acting totally stupidly, uh, and the judges are beginning to hit back and to penalize him in various ways. Uh, in a lawsuit, okay, in New York State, in the E. Jean Carroll case, he and his attorneys are acting like idiots. Anyway, going on with this article, Tom says he wants us to imagine Fox, quote, news, unquote, shuts down or just decides to only tell the truth. And most of the steam goes out of the right wing populist uh, 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 MAGA movement, which its billionaire owners helped create in the U.S. Insurrectionist members of Congress find themselves in jail facing sedition charges, as the previous leader of the country is under criminal investigation for taking help from Putin's Russia. I think this is very unlikely, if only because the help that Putin got from Putin's Russia was so inconsiderable as to be totally insignificant. Uh, I think that Hillary Clinton got far more help, okay, from Israeli interests than Donald Trump got from Putin. But that's another discussion for another day. Also, about Congress members finding themselves in jail, facing sedition charges. I can't imagine that, because all of them are so rich that they would certainly have enough money to raise bail. So even if they were being charged, they wouldn't be sitting in jail. Anyway, the government begins the process of decriminalizing abortion but nationwide. That's good to imagine. Certainly good to imagine. Uh, the Supreme Court Citizens United decision is overturned, and without the flow of billionaire money directing their votes, Congress begins to pass laws that reflect the desires of the majority of the people. Boy, I can just imagine that. But not without a successful dump the corruption movement, Tom. Not without that. Unless you read international newspapers like the Financial Times, odds are you have no idea that same scenario is now playing out in Poland. Now, by the way, we're going to have an article from the Financial Times here tomorrow, one written by Stephanie Kelton. Now playing out in Poland, which for the previous 8 years had been suffering under a Trump-like administration. Last summer, progressive Polish politician Donald Tusk, 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 promised he was going to clean up that country with an, quote, iron broom, unquote. Few took his promise seriously, but after being sworn into office last month, he's actually doing it. Okay? As someone by the name of Maciej Kisielowski writes for the Financial Times, just a few days before Tusk became the prime minister, quote, Poland's politicized public television station, notorious for its xenophobic, homophobic, and racist messages, abruptly went dark. Tusk's culture ministry summarily dismissed the station's board, stopped a broadcast to prevent the outgoing leadership from inflaming tensions by airing live the takeover of the group's headquarters. Last week, two of the top right-wing politicians in Poland were arrested for abuse of power during the previous regime. while only a few hundred people showed up to protest the end of right-wing programming on the nation's main television network. Last Thursday, there was a march to protest the new progressive prime minister, but the reaction was both tepid and nonviolent, as Kisilowski writes for the Financial Times. Quote, these decisive, if heavy-handed actions come at a time when Democrats globally are searching for strategies to deal with populists. Of course, here he's talking of right-wing populists. In the U.S., for example, there is intense debate about whether the protracted legal cases against Donald Trump are serving to boost his campaign to return to the White House. Perhaps Tusk's approach offers hope. Well, to follow Tusk's approach in this country, the FCC would have to lift the licenses of Fox News, for example, and the licenses of many other right-wing outlets. Dislodging the death grip the GOP has on American politics will be more difficult than in Poland, in large part because 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court legalized political bribery with a Citizens United decision. Tom is certainly right about that, but we would be remiss if we did not mention that right now there are 6 corrupt Republicans sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court, because since that decision, they added one more. The 2020 election cost over $14 billion. The 2016 election was only $6.5 billion. But in 2008, 2 years before Citizens United, it hadn't even hit $1 billion. Total spending was a mere $717 million in 2008. As I recall, that was the Obama election. There was a lot of big money floating around there, too. I seem to recall Obama raising 400 or 500 million. Quite a bit of it from small donations, in that election. But now, I don't think it's possible for the small donations to match the big money that is floating around. $14 billion in 2020. Judging from the way 2024 is starting off, did you know that billionaire Vivek Ramaswamy spent $100 million on the Iowa primary? $100 million. And he camped out there for a very long time and did all kinds of retail politics. And he still only ended up with about 8% of the caucus vote. It was incredible. Trump, of course, got something like 53% of the caucus vote or something like that. 54%, I forget. DeSantis came in second, followed closely by Nikki Haley. Currently the darling of the mainstream media. For what reason, I do not know. As the executive director of the money tracking Open Secrets organization, Sheila Krumholtz, said, total outside spending is surprisingly high for this point in the cycle. We're already at $230 million. 100 million, he could have added 100 million of that from Ramaswamy. That's more than twice the previous record through this point in the cycle, which was back in 2016. But it's more than 5 times as much as was spent by this point in the presidential cycle in 2020. Yeah, it's still very early. I mean, Iowa was the first of the well, I shouldn't say the primary states because it's a caucus state, but the first of the contests, the first of the party contests. Of course, we're rapidly approaching New Hampshire now. It'll be interesting to see how Nikki Haley does there. Right wing fascist adjacent billionaires, that's an interesting phrase by Tom, have used that open door to severely corrupt our political system, leading to massive gridlock when it comes to anything average people want. You bet. Can't get Medicare for all through, can't get child tax credits through. There's some compromise going on now, which might let a little bit of that through. Of course, we can't get a federal job guarantee through, can't get a basic income but through. We can't get any taxes for the rich through. We can't get any great bills to handle the climate emergency through. I mean, we need to spend something like $10 trillion a year on that. And we got this little part of an infrastructure bill from Joe Biden through, worth about $500 billion over 10 years, an average of only $50 billion a year, when our very lives depend on taking care of the climate emergency. Massive gridlock is right. Meanwhile, billionaires got tax cuts and deregulation, making them vastly richer. At the same time, the companies that made them rich refused to even commit to paying their workers a living wage. Fewer than 1% of the world's top companies have made such a commitment. Now, here he's only talking about a commitment to pay a living wage. Even fewer than that are actually paying a living wage. As a result, Princeton scholars Martin Gilens and Benjamin Page famously found, and this is a long time ago, back in 2013, 2014, 2015, that the odds almost 10 years ago of average Americans' political desires being translated into policy are about the same as, quote, random noise, unquote. On the other hand, the new American system created by Republicans on our Supreme Court works quite well for the morbidly rich. The people Gilens and Page refer to as the, quote, economic elites, unquote, frequently get everything they want from the political class. They wrote that we still have the, quote, features, unquote, of democracy like elections, but ended their paper with this cautionary note, quote, we believe that policymaking is dominated by powerful business organizations and a small number of affluent Americans, then America's claims to being a democratic society are seriously threatened. So here we are. I mean, we ain't a democratic society. If in a zoo somewhere a single chimpanzee had risen up and taken all the food from all the other chimpanzees and was hoarding it, without being challenged, scientists from all over the world would be trying to figure out what was wrong with that chimpanzee and why the others tolerated his theft. I think Tom must have been watching the various versions of the Planet of the Apes before he wrote this particular column. As Oxfam International pointed out in a report timed to correspond with the kickoff of the Billionaire Love Fest at Davos this week, the 5 richest men in the world, 4 of them Americans, saw their net worth more than double over the past 3 years, for $405 billion to $869 billion. And those 5 corrupt Republicans on the court also ruled in Citizens United that corporations are, quote, persons, unquote, with nearly full access to the Bill of Rights, including the right to use money to pay off politicians. The Republicans on the court call it First Amendment protected, quote, free speech, unquote. the corporations that are producing these billionaires are also gouging American consumers as hard and fast as they can. And also, don't forget, they're also threatening the free speech and free assembly rights of Americans, as witness their recent activities in trying to get the presidents and successfully getting the presidents of various universities fired because they were insufficiently supportive of the free speech of Palestinian rights people. So, the First Amendment protected free speech of money is being protected by the Supreme Court, but the First Amendment rights of Palestinian protesters is not being protected by the Supreme Court. As Oxfam noted, keep in mind, quote, profit, unquote, means essentially, quote, the money that's left over after all our business expenses, including payroll, that we, the owners, get to split up and keep for ourselves. And by the way, among those business expenses, well, I shouldn't say this. I don't know whether this is true or not, so I'll refrain from saying it. Quote, but mirroring the fortunes of the super rich, large firms are set to smash their annual profit records in 2023. 148 of the world's biggest corporations together raked in $1.8 trillion in total net profits in the year to June 2023, a 52% jump compared to average net profits in 2018 to 2021. Their windfall profits surged to nearly $700 billion. Okay, that's a quote from the Oxfam report. That money isn't going to workers, though, who've seen their real inflation-adjusted wages fall worldwide in the same period instead. And Tom also delivers another quote from the report. The report finds that for every $100 of profit made by 96 major corporations between July 22nd and June 23rd, $82 was paid out to rich shareholders. It would take 1,200 years for a woman working in the health and social sector to earn what the average CEO in the biggest 100 Fortune companies earns in a year. 1,200 years. That's the level of inequality that we're allowing to exist, in all our societies. I, of course, advocate for peaceful means to create a situation where we have no billionaires anymore. That is to say, I advocate for the Dump the Corruption campaign and for voting out all those people who are taking any big money from the rich in our society as the solution to the inequality problem. But I cannot completely condemn the people who would use other not so dignified kinds of methods. I would certainly understand their motivation to do away with the billionaires in other ways if it becomes absolutely necessary. Thanks to Clarence Thomas' tie-breaking vote in Citizens United, Americans are not getting what they want, which is another way of saying the morbidly rich and the judges and politicians they've bought are actively breaking our democratic republic. And of course, I completely agree with Tom Hartman on that. On the eve of the 2016 election of Donald Trump, for example, the Progressive Change Institute did a nationwide survey of likely voters. Results were stark. 84% want the government to negotiate drug prices. 79% support expanding Social Security, which Haley and DeSantis both just last week promised to cut. 78% want, quote, fair trade, unquote, that ends shipping our jobs overseas. 77% want to tax corporations that have moved jobs overseas. 70% want universal pre-kindergarten. 74% want all Americans to be able to buy into Medicare for all. 71% support a massive infrastructure spending program aimed at rebuilding our broken roads and bridges and putting people back to work. 70% want free college at all public universities. 68% want a guaranteed minimum income, that's a basic income. 67% want the government to be the employer of last resort to end unemployment like FDR did. That's the federal job guarantee, folks. 66% want the morbidly rich to pay at least a 50% income tax. Currently, the average billionaire pays around 3%. I, of course, want to restore the 90% tax rates that existed during the Eisenhower administration. I might even favor going to 94%. 65% want the big banks broken up and a return to local banking. 64% want net neutrality, so your billion-dollar corporate internet and email providers cannot monitor everything you do online and sell that information. 63% want public financing of elections to get the billionaire money out of them. 60% want post office to offer inexpensive public banking. I'm surprised that Tom mixed what the percentages of people who would like the passage of a Medicare for all bill. I'm not talking about the opportunity to buy into Medicare, okay, which he covered. 74% want all Americans to buy into Medicare. But roughly 66% of all Americans, or 67% of all Americans, want a Medicare for all bill to be passed. So the costs to people seeking health care are free at the point of service. Going on. President Joe Biden, Democrats in Congress, got some of the infrastructure work done and tried to end much of America's nearly $2 trillion in student debt until they were blocked by Republican lawsuits and 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court. Please, Tom, please mention the small group of Democrats who were siding with the Republicans when it came to trying to end student debt. We can't forget people like Joe Manchin and Chris Coons and Kirsten Sinema uh, and other conservative Dems who were at best lukewarm when it comes to ending the $2 trillion in student debt. And you also have to be clear that the way Joe Biden tried to end um, 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 student debt wasn't the right way, which allowed his methods to be blocked by Republican lawsuits and by the 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court. He should have used the power of the Department of Education, under the Education Act. I forget if it's 1965 or 1968, where the power to forgive the student debt was pretty unambiguous in that act. Instead, he tried to use different authority, and there is a lot of suspicion that he did that so that he would be blocked in various ways by the Republicans, because he himself was worried about the moral hazard, quote unquote, of having student debt actually forgiven so that a young generation could get out from under. And a, quote, Green New Deal, unquote, was incorporated into the Inflation Reduction Act. But otherwise, there's a lot that Americans want and deserve that they're not getting. Excuse me a second while I take my pills here. Thank you. Why? Asked Tom. Because the morbidly rich control much of our political process right now and most of our media. As former Supreme Court Justice Louis D. Brandeis famously said, quote, we must make our choice. We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. Unfortunately, nobody listens to Louis Brandeis anymore. This year's election will not only decide whether we're going to let Trump or a similar Republican actually end American democracy, it will also, if enough of us show up, determine if Citizens United can be legislatively overturned and we can purge our political system of the cancer of big money. The Democrats almost did it in 2022. The For the People Act would have reversed significant parts of Citizens United and provided for public funding of and more transparency around elections. It passed the House and got enough votes to pass the Senate under the Constitution. What he means by that is that if decisions in the Senate were made according to the Constitution by majority vote, then it would have passed the Senate under the Constitution also, because the Constitution calls for majority vote in the Senate. But of course, the Senate has passed a rule that for most bills in the Senate, it requires not a majority vote to get the bills passed, but 60 votes to overcome the filibuster, making it practically impossible to pass anything that people want to pass. So, of course, what we're talking about is getting rid of the filibuster. Is Joe Biden for getting rid of the filibuster? Well, he hasn't done a damn thing to indicate that he's in favor of getting rid of the filibuster. Right now, of course, he's slated to be the candidate, okay, of the Democratic Party. God forbid that he remains the candidate, okay, the Democratic Party. But if he is, he has proven that he's opposed to getting rid of the filibuster. He could have overcome, okay, the filibuster and gotten the American Rescue Plan Act with the minimum wage provision in it. All he had to do was to overcome the resistance of the parliamentarian in the Senate and call for that vote to be decided by a majority of 51 to 50, which he could have done had he used, okay, the nuclear option in relation to that particular bill. But instead, what did he do? He said, I respect, okay, the parliamentarian. And so he allowed two dissenters, okay, in the Democratic Party to torpedo the minimum wage provision in that bill. There were actually 8 senators who were against, okay, the minimum wage, but 6 of the 8 would have voted along with him if he had insisted on it, because they were in his pocket. But Manchin and Sinema were not in his pocket. And he was unwilling to do what he needed to do to overcome, okay, the resistance of Manchin and Sinema. Why? Because Biden relies on the filibuster as an excuse for not doing what, okay, the majority of the people favor. And who were the other candidates, okay, for the presidency, and what did they think about the filibuster? Well, of course, the Republicans are not going to do anything to get rid of the filibuster, because their majority leader, Mitch McConnell, would never do anything to get rid of the filibuster, at least not for legislation. So what's the chances of getting rid of the filibuster and getting things through? Well, perhaps we could elect a third-party presidential candidate, like, for example, Bobby Kennedy, who recently announced on the Rising Show, I shouldn't say the Rising Show, the Breaking Points show, in a conversation with Crystal, okay, and Sager, that he's in favor of keeping the filibuster and not overturning the filibuster, because he thinks the filibuster is a democratic institution, which either marks him as terribly stupid or a lying swine. Because, of course, the filibuster is the paradigm case of one of the anti-democratic institutions that infest our government, probably second only to the Supreme Court as an anti-democratic institution. Anyway, there's not much hope for getting a candidate into the presidency who would get rid of the filibuster without a successful dump the corruption campaign. And if you don't get rid of the filibuster, and if you don't get rid of all the people who want to hold on to the filibuster, you won't get any of the bills the people want to pass the House, okay, and the Senate. Going on with Tom, even the Republican filibuster could have been overcome if we hadn't been betrayed by Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, okay, in the Senate. If we do well in this year's elections, next year might be much better legislatively. We would have to do very well. You won't have to worry about Joe Manchin anymore because he's leaving. But right now, okay, in Arizona, uh, it looks like Kirsten Sinema, okay, isn't standing for that seat, okay, anymore. But Carrie Lake is contending, okay, with Ruben Gallego there. Carrie Lake, of course, is a notorious Trumpist and a liar and a cheat, okay, to boot. And she has a 1 point lead, okay, over Ruben Gallego, who in any case is not the most lefty of candidates. Uh, I'll give him this. He is somewhat left of center, but not exactly a squad member type. If we do well in this year's election, next year might be much better legislatively. Not unless we get rid of the filibuster. Not unless we have a successful dump the corruption campaign, Tom. You're holding out hope and still hurting people for vote blue no matter who. You should not be doing that. Make sure everybody you know is registered to vote. The stakes have never been higher. Make sure everybody you know is willing to dump the corruption by voting according to the rule. Of course, it's almost obligatory that I show the rule, okay, at this point. So I will, just to remind people of what the rule says. And here we are. Vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corporations, wealthy individuals, PACs, or party committees, and who repudiate all super PAC support. So that is what we need to have people do. Now, some people want me to tell them who to vote for, but I don't want to fall into that particular trap. I'll leave it to others to recommend who they ought to vote for. I'm just telling them who to vote against, which is plenty of people. Almost everybody in the Congress right now, Senate and House both. The major party candidates contending for the presidency as well. And some of the independent candidates who are already running would be disqualified by this particular rule. So let new candidates step forward who would not be disqualified by this rule. And then we'll talk about choosing among them. But let's worry first about who to vote against, which is almost everybody. Right now, that's more important than who to vote for. I'm very sorry. What's most important right now is who to vote against. If we've all decided we're going to vote against everybody who violates this rule, and we've come around to May or June of 2024, it will be time enough then to discuss who to vote for. And that will be the small number of candidates who have not been taking any big money. So let those candidates step forward, okay, at that point. So, one more piece to cover for tonight. It's from Truth Out. It has to do with people's perceptions about whether Trump should be disqualified. Specifically, there was a poll. I don't think I've shared that yet. So let me share that piece. The headline is from Truth Out. Headline is poll. Most voters would back SCOTUS action to bar Trump from office in some way. This was from Chris Walker at Truth Out, January 16, 2024. Only 39% of Americans want the court to rule that Trump is eligible or that states cannot bar him, from running. So that's a minority who want the court to rule that way that he is eligible. That's a surprise to me. And there, of course, is the orange man himself, evidently looking at something. Maybe it's a computer terminal. Former President Donald Trump attends the closing arguments in the Trump Organization civil fraud trial at the New York State Supreme Court on January 11th, 2024, in New York City. A new poll demonstrates that a majority of Americans would likely be happy with a Supreme Court decision that would bar former President Donald Trump from some or all state ballots in the upcoming 2024 presidential election. Two states, Colorado and Maine, have so far deemed Trump ineligible to be listed on the respective Republican Party primary election ballots based on the insurrection clause in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. That's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed earlier this month to hear challenges from Trump to those states' actions, with oral arguments set to commence on February 8th. So, just a few weeks from now. A decision from the court is expected to come soon after that, as a fast response is needed so as not to disrupt the GOP primaries. So maybe we'll see the Supreme Court act as fast as the International Court of Justice evidently has just acted. That would be wonderful. It's unlikely that the court will rule to bar Trump from any or all ballots. 6 of the 9 justices are conservative, with 3 of those justices being picked by the former president himself. But an ABC News Ipsos poll published on Friday indicates that most Americans would prefer to see an action from the court that would allow for Trump to be barred in at least some manner. According to the poll, a plurality of Americans, 49%, back the actions taken by officials in Colorado and Maine to bar Trump from appearing on the ballot. 46% of Americans oppose those actions. So it's close, 49 to 46 who opposed those particular actions. I'm sorry, 49 to 46 who opposed, the 46 opposed, the 49% approved. On what the Supreme Court should do, however, 30% believe the court should rule to remove Trump from every ballot in the country, deeming him an insurrectionist under the terms of the 14th Amendment. Another 26% believe the court should rule that his eligibility should be decided on a state-by-state basis. I would be happy if the court came out there. The court left it to the states. I would rather, of course, they ruled that he be removed from every ballot in the country, but that is too much to hope for. Taken together, the polling shows that 56% of voters would be fine with the court rendering a decision blocking him from either some or all ballots across the country. Only 39% of respondents in the poll said the Supreme Court should rule that Trump is eligible for every ballot in the United States. As the court hears arguments from all parties involved, including receiving amicus briefs from others, either in support of or opposing efforts to deny him ballot access, other states, including Alaska and Illinois, are currently pondering whether they too should deem Trump ineligible to run, making the court's decision all the more important to expediently render. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment states no person who has previously held a governmental position and has, quote, previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, unquote, can hold office ever again if they've, quote, engaged in insurrection, unquote, or, quote, given aid or comfort, unquote, to those who have, unless 2/3 of Congress votes to allow them to do so. The clause doesn't require a person to be found guilty of being an insurrectionist or otherwise have that designation given to them, and indeed courts have in the past disqualified candidates when citizens have challenged their eligibility to run for office under that clause. Trump arguably fits the bill in many people's minds of someone who should be denied access to the presidential ballot based on his actions and inaction on January 6, 2021, when a mob of his loyalists, spurred on by an incendiary speech he had given to them that morning, violently attacked the U.S. Capitol building. Trump spent several hours refusing to call the mob off and even posted tweets online that seemed to egg them on. He also used the opportunity to try to compel lawmakers in Congress to agree to illegitimately overturn the 2020 presidential election, which he had indubitably lost to Joe Biden. Well, I think there are arguments against, the indubitably lost, to Joe Biden, but of course, the procedures of certification have rendered that, a moot point. The certification was sent, to the Congress, to be certified. The vice president was to play, a ministerial role in doing that. And he did play that particular role. Mike Pence did. Because he did, Joe Biden was certified to become the president of the United States on January 20th, 2020. Trump tried, to overturn that. Which I think was part of the insurrectionist activity. So, some people might ask, why am I for Trump being disqualified from the ballot? My argument is, while my main thrust is for people to be voted out of office or voted against if they are contending for office through a massive dump the corruption campaign. The basic idea is to dump the corruption in whatever legal way fits the bill. Donald Trump is certainly thoroughly corrupt. There is no one more corrupt than he, including Joe Biden. I'm ready to entertain arguments that Joe Biden is equally corrupt. I hold no proof for Joe Biden, but certainly no one is more corrupt, has been a more corrupt president than Donald Trump during his time in office, when he violated the emoluments clause to the Constitution from his very first day, and then violated it every single day that he was in office. From that time to the end of his term in office, he was in violation, of the emoluments clause. He also helped to arrange a deal for his son-in-law with the Saudis worth $5 billion. And if you say there's no evidence he actively helped, he didn't have to actively help. He had his son-in-law in there as the presidential assistant. His son-in-law had the ear of Donald Trump every single day. His son-in-law was the president of his favorite child. Of course, he wanted his son-in-law to make a $5 billion deal that would favor his daughter, okay, and his grandson. Of course, he appreciated the Saudis bringing that deal to his son. How can you get any more corrupt than that? Anyway, the idea is to dump the corruption. If you can dump it by getting people off the ballot, okay, in a legal way, I'm for that. Of course, the final safeguard is that we have a successful dump the corruption campaign, so that even though he's on the ballot everywhere, we can still have the voters get rid of him. That is, of course, very, very important. Moving to your comments, D. What do you say?
I really don't have too much to say. I was not here the whole time, even though I appeared I was here the whole time. I had to get dogs in and out, and there was stuff I was doing, so I didn't really get to hear everything.
Okay. Okay, so I will move to the comments. Okay, Steve Wolfbrand said, Doc, I've started taking NMN and taurine supplements. Do your research. You will live longer. Okay, Steve, I haven't heard K of NMN. So please spell that out for me. And I will do my research. And thank you for the suggestion. Have you heard, by the way, of phosphatidylserine? And also huperzine A, okay, and Bacopa monnieri. Those are three things that we are taking here for memory, okay, and for focus. Those seem to be working very well for us and have been a big help, okay, to Bonnie. And I think they've been a help to me too. I think since we've been taking them that I'm a little sharper than I was. But anyway, thank you for your recommendations. Kay says, okay, I'm out of here. Love you all. Thank you for coming, Kay. Thank you for staying. Steve says, good night, Kay. Jeff Denton says, oops, I'm out of character. I meant to say filibuster, but I ran out of characters. No free speech for me. Or Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Thank you, Jeff. And Steve says, wrong, I'm out. Why are you out, Steve? Why are you out, Steve? Anyway, thanks for the suggestion. I appreciate it. So I think that does it for tonight. It is about 10:30. I will be back tomorrow night with a neoliberalism show. Will you be back tomorrow night, Dee, with a show?
Yes, I'll be back. Just that there seems to be stuff we're trying to verify, and things happening. So I'll be back tomorrow night.
Yeah, the stuff about the International Court of Justice.
Yes.
Okay, and what they did. Yeah, that's going to be a big story tomorrow night. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm certainly going to join you for that. As for myself, tomorrow night is a neoliberalism night here, and the topic is but neoliberalism never lived, but is an extremely active corpse. That's the title for tomorrow night.
Okay.
And there we'll be covering, okay, a pretty good analysis and claim, okay, by Dean Baker, that there actually was never a neoliberalism as it was advertised. And we'll also be covering a very brilliant piece on MMT that appeared in the Financial Times, and that is by Stephanie Kelton. And we'll also be covering how the military industrial complex has been the big winner in our foreign policy, and certainly not the American people. So those are things we're going to cover tomorrow night. I hope you'll tune in for that. I think it should be a very interesting show.
Yes, I think so too. And here, Andy Candy has something to say.
Thank you, Dee. Andy, have you seen about SCOTUS's weakening federal government's offices and branches? What I've seen is that SCOTUS was going to make a decision that was going to weaken the administrative state by questioning the power of Congress to implicitly delegate certain authorities to federal agencies. That's been something that's been hanging fire for a long time. If SCOTUS does rule in such a way, that will cripple the regulatory powers of the federal government. And that makes it even more necessary that we get our Dump the Corruption campaign started, that we make it successful for 2024. Because if we do, then the first thing we will be able to do in 2025 is we will be able to get a bill through Congress that will invalidate the SCOTUS decision and prevent the new law from being reviewed by the Supreme Court using the exceptions clause of Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. We could do that first thing and completely nullify what the Supreme Court may be getting ready to do right now. But if we're going to get that done, we got to do Dump the Corruption. Yep, to invalidate that decision of the Supreme Court, to invalidate the Hobbs decision of the Supreme Court, to invalidate all of the sorry things that the Supreme Court has done in recent years. They could be invalidated within a few days of a new Congress willing to act on these things. That's how important the Dump the Corruption campaign is. So we've got to get that started. It is the most important thing we can do in politics, in activism. It's the most important thing. There is nothing more important for us to spend our time on than this Dump the Corruption campaign. And I freely admit, I'm not the one, to get this going. I mean, I'm an 85-year-old guy. I can't work 16 hours a day anymore. That's not possible for me. I used to be able to do that, but I cannot do that anymore. I can't lead such a campaign. I can develop ideas for it. I can do that as I have been doing, and I can talk about it. But I need people to come and help me. I need people who can run that particular campaign and who will finally recognize that is the only campaign that matters right now. It's the key to having a new foreign policy. It's the key to getting Medicare for all. It's the key to getting a Green New Deal. It's the key to getting family leave for people, child tax credits, all of the various things we want but can't get through this corrupt Congress and presidency of ours. Dumping the corruption has to come first before any of the other things. It is the key to getting everything else done. And nobody sees that, D, except for you and me.
Yes. I'm just, like I said, I think the universe is seeing it, that it's, but you need the people to do it. That's the thing. Because we're seeing things changing, but as things are changing, you need people to actually implement, actually be there. You need full force.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think that if we could get Tom Hartman on our side, it would be really great because Tom, one of the reasons why I covered Tom is because he sees the corruption, he sees what it's done to our political system. He's very well aware of what it's done, to our political system. He knows the importance of getting rid, of the corruption. The only problem is I don't know how to get to him to make the case to get him to support, a dump the corruption campaign. He would be the perfect one to give some visibility to that campaign, at least to start with, and to get candidates running on a dump the corruption platform. Anyway, I guess that's enough for tonight.
Well, that's it. Because something, people like Tom Hartman, you have different ones that they'll always go back to the scenario that that they have to stay within the Democratic Party. They're afraid that you're going to, a third party would
Yeah,
cause the
Tom
Republicans
Hartman,
getting.
he always goes back to vote blue no matter who, no matter who. And it doesn't matter what Joe Biden does, how horrible his policies are. He's still, in the end, when it comes down to choosing who to vote for, in this election, if Trump and Biden are the two candidates, Tom Hartman's going to come down for Biden. You know it.
Exactly. Because he may lead people to look at other people and whatever, but in the very end, he stays within the parameters.
Yes, and this is going to be in spite of the fact that it looks like the International Court of Justice is going to rule against Israel
Mm-hmm.
and is going to tag it with a genocide label.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden has been complicit in genocide, and the United States is likely to be tagged with that label too. And yet Tom Hartman is still going to go vote blue no matter who. I mean, come on. There have to be limits of some. There has to be something you won't accept.
Because he always goes back to that with Ralph Nader.
I know he always goes back to that. With Ralph Nader. But that's a false case. It
I
wasn't
know.
Ralph Nader who caused Al Gore to lose the election of 2000.
No, it wasn't.
Al Gore lost that election because he was politically stupid enough not to get the help of Bill Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
If he had had the active help of Bill Clinton, he would have won that election.
Exactly.
I can't stand Bill Clinton, but it was obviously political malpractice to go all high and mighty and say, I'm not going to accept any help, from Bill Clinton, and to turn him off, during that campaign. I
And you
mean,
know
Bill
something?
Clinton was still overwhelmingly popular.
And you know something? That's what happened with Hillary too, because there were times she didn't want Bill out there with her own campaign. And he himself had told her about those different swing states and that he was feeling uncomfortable. He said, you really need to, or really need to get help in these particular states, he was saying. And she was saying that her app, whatever she was using, whatever they were using technology, was saying otherwise. But he was filling the room, Bill Clinton, saying different places and what he would do. And she wanted to do it on her own. And had she listened to him, it would have been different for her.
I agree. I
Yeah,
completely agree. She
he
should have
knows how to. Mm,
gotten much more help, from Bill Clinton. And had she gotten it, had she sent him, into Wisconsin and Michigan, and Pennsylvania to campaign for her, that would have been enough to swing the election.
And basically, that's what he was telling her. He was worried about those states, and she was thinking everything was going to be fine. And she doesn't have communication skills. He knows how to read a room. He knows how to, talk to people.
Yes, he has communication skills. He is thoroughly corrupt, of course.
Exactly, he is. But some
Thoroughly
people,
corrupt.
but some
Okay,
people know how to communicate.
but some people know how to communicate, and some people just look like an evil witch when they communicate. And unfortunately, she is in that category.
Exactly. But
Okay,
you,
Andy Candy says, would emailing the squad help? I contacted Cornell, but no reply. I don't know. We have to get to someone close to Tom Hartman, I
mm,
think, to start and see whether Tom will buy off on this. He must be feeling really badly, about what Biden is doing, in Israel.
mhm.
It's got to be stressing him because it is stressing every progressive something awful. It's got to be on his conscience. He can't be happy about voting for Joe Biden again.
And you know
Okay,
something,
Andy Candy says, when Biden overrode Congress for Ukraine Israel funding, tyrannical. Well, let's put it this way. What he did, I don't think was illegal. I don't think it was actually beyond his powers. So if the situation had been different, in other words, uh, if this hadn't been done on behalf of Ukraine, and Israel, if it had been done on behalf of some injustice that was occurring, somewhere in the world, would we then really feel, that that was tyrannical? I don't know. I'm not sure. What he was doing was legally within the authority of the president, to do. So
mhm.
he was not legally bypassing Congress, when he did that. Uh, there are some who think, that when Franklin Roosevelt, used the Lend-Lease bill, uh, 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 to arm, both the UK and Russia, in order to resist, the Nazis. Okay, there are some people who think that was tyranny too. I don't. Andy Candy says, I woke up in the middle of the night stressing over Gaza, Israel. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to stress over that. I mean, it is a goddamn genocide going on there, or close to it. I mean, even if it doesn't meet completely the conditions, of genocide, there are all kinds of human rights violations going on there. It's certainly ethnic cleansing. I mean, it's just horrible. It's the most horrible thing we've seen since the Second World War.
Yes, and these children and people are starving to death. And it's just horrific.
Yeah, not just the children who are starving to death.
Adults too, yes.
Yes, adults too. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people are now at risk of dying from starvation because Israel won't let the trucks in.
Right. And obviously people have died from not being able to get their medications, say, whatever medications they need.
Yes. Right. We have stressed over what's going on, in Gaza, Israel also. I think none of us have been sleeping well,
No.
through this period of time.
It's just so horrific that something like this is going on. And,
Right. Okay. So we have to believe that Tom Hartman, who certainly is a person of conscience, has been feeling the same kind of stress. I
definitely.
know he doesn't want, to vote for Joe Biden. He's only thinking of voting for Joe Biden, in the context that he'll have a choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And that's why he's saying, well, in spite of everything Joe Biden has done, he's still not going to be as bad as Donald Trump, for democracy. But that's why the Dump the Corruption campaign can be so important, because if we make it a success, none of us will have to have that choice, because both Trump and Biden would be excluded by the Dump the Corruption campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Neither would have a chance, of becoming a president if we could make that campaign, successful. So if Tom were to buy off on this, uh, he could support that campaign and help to make it successful. He would not have to make that choice. He would finally have another choice that would be viable and would be practical, because people were excluding both Biden, and Trump. In fact, it would probably help Tom Hartman if Trump were thrown off, enough ballots that it was necessary for the Republican Party to abandon him and
Mm-hmm.
nominate someone else. And that could happen if all the blue state, if the Supreme Court were to rule that they're going to leave it to the states, and all the blue states, simply kick him off the ballot. It would only take a few purple states to guarantee that Trump could not get, a majority of the electoral votes.
Now, would you be able to write to Tom Hartman and do you have an address or something? Just
Okay, I don't know. I have to investigate, whether I can directly get to him.
because even suggesting it to him, you know what I'm saying? Just if you find a way to get to him.
Yeah, find a way to get
Like,
to him and send him a stream, where I lay the case out.
right, just give him the option.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to think a lot about that and see if I can figure, a way around.
Hmm.
Andy Kenny says we just need to find our Lancelot. Great topics. Glad I had a chance to hear. Ceasefire. Stop the madness. Well, thank you, Andy. I think you're the only one here right now. Uh, and so I think we're going to say good night.
Yeah, so good night, Bonnie.
Okay, good night,
Eh,
Bonnie. Good night.
oh, oh, I forgot to say, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share, share, share.
Yes, everybody. Share, share, share. And please buy us some coffees. We both have our Buy Me a Coffee account. And Dee has a Cash App account.
Yes, Dolores Piers, Dolores Piers.
Oh, yes, Pers.
Yeah, P2EsRS.
Two E's, RS, yes.
Oh,
And Andy says, night, love, and peace.
yes,
Thank
good
you.
night to you,
Good night
Andy.
to you. We'll see you
All
tomorrow.
righty, see you tomorrow.
Good night, Dee.
Good night.